This is the Team Yankee list I took to the Western Australian Red October tournament last week, and I thought I'd go through it and look at what worked and what didn't. This was actually my first list and first games of Team Yankee, so it wasn't perfect. This is a 75-point British list from Iron Maiden. It's a tank list of an armoured squadron from 17 21st Lancers. The compulsory units are the Chieftain Armoured Squadron HQ with one Chieftain tank, upgraded with Stillbrew add-on armour. Stillbrew was an armour package upgrade that added extra protection to the turret front to increase survivability. The list also has 2 compulsory Chieftain armoured troops of 3 tanks each. In Team Yankee, Chieftain is a generation behind other tanks like the M1 Abrams and the Leopard 2. It's a 1960s design, but has good armour and a powerful 120mm gun. Improvements in fire control, including infrared sights, laser rangefinders and armour upgrades, means it's still playable, but it is starting to show its age. The Stillbrew armour takes the Chieftain's front armour to 18, equivalent to the M1 Abrams and Leopard 2, but side armour is only 6, so keep the enemy to your front. Let's do the calculations. A T-72 has an anti-tank of 22. At the standard front armour of 17, this means a Chieftain has to roll an armour save of 5 to equal and a 6 to bounce. With an engagement over 16 inches, that changes to a 4 to equal and a 5 or 6 to bounce. A bit better. With the Stillbrew front armour increased to 18, these save numbers all drop by 1. So at long range a 3 will equal and a 4, 5 or 6 would bounce. These numbers mean Stillbrew is a solid investment in survivability. I would change my list to include this for all the tanks in future, not just the HQ. This would increase the points cost to 21 points for each 3 tank troop. Just be aware that the weight of the extra armour drops the cross number from 2+ to 3+. British tank tactics also suit my defensive playstyle. Doctrine was to defend dug into tree lines and engage Soviet armour with long-range gunnery. I played this way through the tournament and it worked okay for me. I did have one hairy moment when I deployed my 3-tank troop a bit too far forward, and 2 companies of T-72s rushed me. I was only saved by timely reserves. If we move on to support options, the list has a mechanised platoon from the Irish Guards, mounted in FV432s. The infantry here are 4 GPMG teams with 60mm anti-tank, 3 Carl Gustav anti-tank teams, a 2-inch mortar team, and 4 FV432 armoured personnel carriers. I added 2 Milan teams with an additional FV432 for another 2 points. The infantry were incredibly effective when dug in to defend an objective. Every stand except the mortars has an anti-tank weapon, which were a constant threat to enemy tanks, but probably the standout performer of the whole list were the Milan teams. Mixed in with the infantry, these teams could reach out up to 36 inches across the board. With careful placement, these were getting telling side shots against the side armour of T-72s who were engaging my tanks. The infantry were great value for the points and they were rock solid, particularly in defence. And take as many Milans as you can find. I think I'll buy another blister of infantry so I can field a mechanised force by swapping out one of the tank troops. The only drawback is painting the DPM camouflage for the uniforms. I followed the colours and painting guide in the Iron Maiden sourcebook, but they just didn't come out quite right, and painting the 4-colour uniform scheme took me a full week. The next support option was a Scorpion Recce troop of the Queen's Dragoon Guards. I love the Scorpion and I did use their spearhead rule to expand my deployment area in a couple of games, but they didn't do much else in the games I played. I have heard the Scorpion and the 30mm armed scimitar are very effective against BMP hordes, but I didn't encounter those. They're also a bit slow for my original plan to use them to drive on to snatch an objective, so unfortunately they didn't prove as effective as I'd hoped. I might drop them from the updated list. One support unit that did pull its weight was the FV438 Swingfire guided weapons troop. This unit mounts the powerful Swingfire anti-tank guided missile in a 2-launcher turret, mounted on an FV432 chassis. It has a staggering anti-tank of 23. I used these to give long-range anti-tank support to my dug-in infantry units. Swingfire has a 48-inch range, so you can conceal them behind the stationary infantry and fire over them. Swingfire also allows firing using a remote controller, so Swingfire teams remain gone to ground when firing. I completely forgot this rule when playing, so I'll try and remember it in future. The weakness here is, as a 2-team unit, it will not be in good spirits with any loss or bail. I also deployed them in one game to guard an objective, but positioned them too close and the enemy got within the minimum missile range, so keep that in mind when you deploy. Next up we have divisional support units. These included a forward observer mounted in an FV432 and a 2-gun M109 field battery. To be honest, I made less use of the artillery than I'd hoped. In 2 of my 3 games they never even made it onto the table from reserves. I didn't succeed a single reserve roll the entire day. I chose the M109 because I had a couple of Zvezda plastic kits. These are lovely and I hate resonant metal kits. But in future I'd probably use a 4-gun battery of 105mm Abbots instead. 4 guns is better than the 2 heavier guns, both for morale and ranging in purposes. However, the FU was good value. The special rule is that the FU reduces the score needed to range in by 1. This offset the +1 penalty for only having a 2-gun battery, so it cancelled out and ranging in was just based on the firing battery skill. One thing my list lacked was adequate anti-air. I included a 2-vehicle Spartan Blowpipe SAM section. The Spartan is a tiny APC based on the Scorpion chassis, and Blowpipe is a manually guided surface-to-air missile. It has a 48-inch range, so it can cover a lot of the table, and has a halted rate of fire of 2. It can't fire while moving. The missile also has a secondary role against armour and stationary infantry and bulletproof cover. Going into the tournament I knew a 2-launcher section of Blowpipe probably wasn't enough anti-air. Blowpipe actually put in a solid performance, in one game deploying from reserve face-to-face with a pair of Hinds which they shot down. But if I'd faced an opponent with more choppers I would have struggled. I already have a box of 4 tracked Rapier on order. For the same points this is a more capable system than Blowpipe. The last option in my list was a Lynx HELARM flight armed with TOW anti-tank missiles. When I was drafting this list, I wanted as much anti-tank as I could get to counter Soviet tank hordes. My Lynx performed okay, but they must be halted to fire, and only fire 1 missile per chopper per turn. The hunter-killer rule means they were hard to hit if they stayed near terrain, but it ends up being a lot of points for not a lot of additional firepower. A better option might be the Lynx Milan platoon, which can drop Milan infantry teams into the enemy's rear, or even a Lynx air mobile platoon with infantry teams including Milan teams to do the same. Unlike the Cobra for the US or the Hind for the Soviets, Lynx just has a missile armament. It doesn't have guns or rockets, so it can't attack infantry or other helicopters. Having the helicopters was nice, but in a 75-point list they're a bit of a one-trick pony. So let's look at a bit of a summary about how my list went. It worked okay. I didn't get steamrolled in any of my games. However, in 75 points you can't have everything. I would probably drop the Scorpions. My 2-gun battery of M109s was okay, but 4 Abbots was probably better bang for your points. Blowpipe worked okay, but again, a 4-team unit would be better, and tracked Rapier is probably a better option for the same points. The HELARM choppers were okay, but not very versatile. In a small list like this, I think the points could be better used. However, I would cram in as many extra Milan teams as I could, and the Swingfire guided weapons team was a solid performer. With the always gone to ground rule, I'd chance this as a 2-team unit just for the long-range hard-hitting punch to support the infantry. The British infantry teams were rock solid, so a mechanised list would be a tough nut to crack. They will be a pain to paint, but another blister of infantry would allow me to switch this to mech if desired. Plus mechanised platoons get the option of extra FV432 Milan teams. So my list needs a bit of modification for my next game, but the British weapons and doctrine match my playstyle pretty well. But this is just my preference. The other British player in the tournament had an entirely different focus. It must have worked for him because Ben took out the trophy for best generalship. What would you do differently? Have you had different experiences with any of the units in my list? Thanks to everyone who played and organised Red October, Western Australia's first Team Yankee tournament. Hopefully we'll get to do it again soon.